Hello, and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin's our guest both hours, and it's open forum. That's what you expect on a Thursday, and we like nothing better than to meet or exceed your expectations. The number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Open forum is open to anyone. You certainly don't have to be Catholic to call. If you have a question about the Catholic faith, about Catholic belief, about Catholic teaching, 888-318-7884. Open forum also, especially when Jimmy's here, means we're pretty much open to anything you want to ask. All those categories I just described, plus anything else in reality. 888-318-7884. Jimmy, the author of a whole bunch of books, a long-time apologist. As a matter of fact, coming up on his, I believe, 30th anniversary of being a professional apologist, and also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Mr. Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Mr. Cyril Kellett.
888-318-7884, the number. So what drops tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Well, last night, I dropped a debate that I did on the Capturing Christianity channel on the subject of authority, so Sola Scriptura versus the Catholic model. Today, I dropped a debate debrief about that, and tomorrow on Mysterious World, we are going to be looking at the 1960s Socorro, New Mexico UFO landing witnessed by police officer Lonnie Zamora.
All right. 888-318-7884, the number here. You do this show that's so popular and intelligent and reasonable and all that. Have you noticed that there's a thing on the internet where it seems to me some people make a living just making weird videos? And I don't even mean offensive or anything like that. Just weird, just doing weird things. Are you aware that this is
like,
a whole...
What, shaking their butts or pretending they're planks or...
like pretending they're learning to play the recorder, and their recorder is going through a birdhouse that has a hand in it that helps them play the recorder, and then a magical hand appears to scold them when they make mistakes.
I have not seen such videos.
Oh. All right.
I've seen weird videos. I haven't seen that one, I should say.
Okay. All right. It just seems like such an odd thing, and sometimes mesmerizing. Sometimes it's just so weird that you're like, "What?" And then you forward it to everybody.
Oh, they've been doing that longer than the internet. There was I think the name was Shay St. John. But there was a kind of performance artist back in the 1980s who was making VHSs.
Oh,
that were about this alleged. I mean, he was playing a character. He was a guy, but he was playing a character who was like a model. The story was this was a model that had gotten into a train accident and had to rebuild her body out of mannequin parts. And they are the videos, at least the one I have seen of that character, is just amazingly bizarre. It's like, this is so
that's what these
weird. It's hard to. It's like there's this cringe reaction, but it's hard to look away.
And some of them have a kind of is this person serious, or do they know that this is surrealism? I don't know. I was exposed to it because John Sorensen forwarded me what he told me was the greatest video on the internet, and it was, and he was pranking me. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I didn't know what to make of it. 888-318-7884. Lots of folks already on the line. I guess we'll start in New York. I mean, if you're going to start somewhere, start in the fourth most populous state in the Union. Is that? I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't know. Frank in New York, thanks for starting us off. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. God bless you. This is a strange question, Jimmy. I was debating a Protestant the other day. I think you actually debated this fellow before. And we were talking about the priesthood. And he said, well, I said it's a contraction of the word presbyteros. He says that didn't happen until the Middle Ages, till Henry VIII. Well, I found in the old Anglo-Saxon they were actually using it back in 700 as the word priost. But He denied the priesthood. He said if they were going to use that word, they would have used the word hieros in the Greek, which they didn't use. And Paul actually calls himself a priest in Romans 15:16 in a number of translations. But it's a three-part question, Jimmy. I want to know, he denied that Timothy was a bishop, too. He called him an apostolic legate, which I can't find that anywhere in the New Testament. And I want to know, were the apostles bishops and are bishops priests? So if you were attacked with this type of situation, how would you answer it, Jimmy?
Well, your friend laid quite a number of things on the table there, and I don't know if I'll have the space to respond to them all. But in general, the general answer is that language changes over time, and you can't simply define a word based on what its etymology is from. Its etymology or word origins can be informative and helpful in understanding a word at times, but they aren't something that you can strictly rely upon because words change meaning. My favorite example of that, which Cy Kellett may know, is the word nice.
Oh,
because
yeah.
If I say, that's a nice dress, honey, I don't mean that is a foolish dress, honey, but that's where the word nice comes from based on its word origin. So it comes from the Latin word necius. Ne is a negation, and scius is, as you can hear, it's related to science. It's knowing, and so necius means not knowing, meaning ignorant or foolish. And that is not what we mean by nice today. The term has definitely changed meanings. So when it comes to the terms connected with ministry in the Bible and in subsequent history, they have also undergone a process of development. You're quite correct that the English word priest, which comes from the Middle Ages, if not earlier, is an anglicization and contraction of the Greek word presbyteros, which means elder. And Christians have always considered the priests we have today, the Christian priests, to be the same office as the office of elder in the New Testament. Now, there is another term that's used for priest, hierus, which is used for Jewish priests and pagan priests in the New Testament. And in English, the term priest became extended to refer to those individuals as well. That's why today we talk about Jewish priests, not Jewish hieroi. And similarly, we talk about pagan priests, not pagan hieroi. So in English today, we have an umbrella term, priest, that covers all three different forms of religious office: the pagan priests, the Jewish priests, and the Christian priests. In terms of the apostles, well, again, we have flexibility in the early terms that were used for Christian ministry. The other two terms that are most notable in the New Testament that became the names of offices are episkopos, which literally means overseer, but it is also the basis of the English word bishop, and diakonos, which originally meant servant, but today it is the basis of the office deacon. Well, what we find when we look at the apostles is they used all three of those terms, and they oversaw different groups of Christians. So the apostles could be described as episkopoi or bishops. They also tended to be older, and so at one point St. Peter refers to himself as a presbyteros, or an elder, or a priest, if you want to translate it that way. And they also were servants of Christ, so they can be described as diakonoi, or deacons. What the fullness of their office, and some of these expressions may not even be referring to themselves in terms of office. Like when Peter says he's an elder or a presbyteros, he may just mean I'm an old man. He's not necessarily referring to his religious office at that point. But the standard theological understanding is that they had the highest office in the church, apostle, and that subsumed the functions of the lesser offices. So they had all the powers of priests, all the powers of presbyteroi all the powers of bishops, which itself subsumes the powers of the priesthood, which itself subsumes the power of the diaconate. And so as you move up in the ranks, you have first the powers of the diaconate, you become a deacon, then you gain the powers of the presbytery or priesthood, then you gain the powers of the episcopacy, and back in the first century, you could also be an apostle, which subsumed all of those different functions.
Frank, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that was helpful to you, but it's time for the first break, so we will do that. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and more of that right after this.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
The power of prayer simply means that words have an effect. For example, when a couple says, "I do," it literally changes two people to becoming one in marriage. When you say, "I love you," it changes us and it gives us value. The power of prayer is in the words and in the sentiment, but it's also in the fact that God, who is omnipotent, all-powerful, answers our prayers.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's open forum. Anyone can call, whether you're Christian or not. You got a question, you want to ask about the Catholic faith, about morals, about Jesus, or about literally anything else in the universe. 888-318-7884 is the number. I have two ads to read. They both end with exclamation points. So I'll do this one, and I'll really try hard to give it a...
So before you do, so how are you going to pronounce the exclamation points? Because it has different phonic values in different languages. I mean, in the language of the Bushman,
really,
when it's written in the Latin script, the exclamation point has a tongue click sound.
All right.
And so, like, you see these guys in The Gods Must Be Crazy, that movie from the 80s, the Bushman.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to just...
I'm going to try that, Jimmy.
There you go.
Everywhere that there's an exclamation point in this script, I'm going to do the...
Good.
Have you heard? There's a store-wide sale going on at shop.catholic.com. Hundreds of great Catholic books, digital products, and online courses, all on sale. From 10 to 25% off and more. Want to stock up on Jimmy Akin books? They're on sale. All of them. Need extra copies of my book, The Teacher of Strange Things? We've got you covered. Visit shop.catholic.com today and check out hundreds of great deals, packages, and special offers going on now.
Good. That was much more entertaining than the usual way, and I liked that there were. That there were multiple tongue clicks in a row.
That's how Carrie. Carrie writes the scripts. So from now on, that's what Carrie gets every time he puts an exclamation point on there. Let's go to Salinas, California. Christopher in Salinas, watching on YouTube. We're glad you're here, Christopher. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, well, when I was hearing the tongue click, maybe you can get yourself a little bell just like they do in Salvation Army when they're asking for donations during Christmas time. That could work.
Especially if my tongue gets tired. I really appreciate that, Christopher. Thank you.
Yes. My question for Jimmy is regarding the topic of exorcism. Mm-hmm. I've done research on the topic. In some way, it's interesting, but I know by the church's teaching, it has to be a priest who can only do the exorcism. My question is, can a laity do a minor exorcism? There are a couple of reasons why I ask this. I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, near my mother's hometown in Mexico, there was someone who was possessed by the devil because in the home it had manifestation of the devil, and the possession of the man got worse and worse and worse. The family tried to contact the parish, but the parish didn't do anything. It wasn't until one day the possession of the man got worse. They called police officers. One of the police officers tried to grab the possessed man, but the possessed man launched the police officer into the ground so horribly people got scared. But in the crowd, there was a young lady. She had a crucifix and holy water and started casting holy water in the demon. The demon couldn't resist it. She invoked the name of the Lord, and the devil left. That's the first. That's the first part. The second part is I saw a video on YouTube from a Catholic priest. His name is Father.
Oh no! Wait, let's not do that. Christopher, I just don't want to give out the names of folks that we don't know because we can't vouch for them or whatnot. But I do think we have the question.
Or even if we do know them, if we're not familiar with the situation, we can't evaluate it. But you can describe the situation.
Yeah.
And without the name, and I can react to it.
There's a Venezuelan priest, very famous. He goes in Latin America, Mexico, and the United States, and he has a very good way of explaining the Catholic faith. And one of his videos, someone asked him if a laity can do an exorcism. According to this Venezuelan priest, said only a priest can do it, but he acknowledged Ephesians chapter 6, 10, 11. The only way someone can take on the devil is if you are full of the armor of God. But this priest acknowledged Acts 19, 13 to 16, where the Jewish exorcists tried to exorcise, but the devil attacked them naked. And he just said,
okay,
that's how intensive the devil is. So,
all right. So the question basically is, can the laity perform even minor exorcisms?
Okay, so the term minor exorcism is a term of art in Catholic theology, in Catholic law. It refers to a kind of minor ritual that is performed in the context of other rituals like baptism, for example. There is a minor exorcism in the official rite of baptism. And it's not the same as what you described being done in your hometown. That was more of an emergency procedure where the woman was trying to drive out the demon in the middle of a major demonic manifestation. So let's sketch the basic principles. In principle, any person can perform an exorcism. In principle, anybody can invoke the name of the Lord and expel or ask God to expel and his angels to help expel a demon from a situation. And that's illustrated by the fact that Jewish people who were not Christians could also perform exorcisms. We read about that in the Gospels, for example, where Jesus is at one point accused of using demonic power to drive out demons. And he says, well, if I'm doing that, who are your sons doing it by? Because he's aware of other Jewish exorcists. So you don't even have to be a Christian in principle in order to be an exorcist. But there are significant dangers to doing an exorcism, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And we see examples of that in the book of Acts, like where one group of the sons of a Jewish gentleman named Sceva are trying to drive out a particularly fierce demon, and the demon says, and they're even using the name of Jesus, and they're saying, like, they're using a formula like, in the name of Jesus whom Paul preaches, we drive you out. And the demon says, well, Jesus I know, and Paul I've heard of, but who the blank are you? And then he attacks them and drives them out, like naked and stuff, running out into the streets. So there can be very significant dangers to doing this as well. And in the course of church history, the church has decided that even though it's possible in principle for anyone to perform an exorcism, the full-blown exorcism, known as a major exorcism, is only to be performed by a priest who has special training and who has the authorization of his bishop. So it's not just any priest. It's only certain priests are authorized to perform major exorcisms. Then there are what are known as minor exorcisms, which are part of, like I said, other ceremonies like baptism. And those other ceremonies can be performed by ordinary priests. Ordinary priests can baptize. Deacons can baptize. In an emergency circumstance, a layperson can baptize, but when a layperson baptizes, they're not doing the full ceremony. They're doing the essential part of it, the application of the water with the Trinitarian formula. I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So lay people, as far as I am aware, I could be mistaken on this, but as far as I'm aware, they're not authorized to do what is technically known as a minor exorcism. However, there is another thing that lay people can do, and that's what is known as a deliverance prayer. A deliverance prayer is like an exorcism, but it doesn't use the official text of the rite of exorcism. And so lay people are authorized to use deliverance prayers. Some deliverance prayers have even been approved for the church, by the church, for the laity to use. Here in the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has a booklet of deliverance prayers that they publish that lay people can use. And so I would view what happened in your hometown as kind of an emergency deliverance prayer. She wasn't using the official text of the rite of exorcism to do this based on your description. So this would fall into the category of a deliverance prayer. Having said that, even though the laity are allowed to use deliverance prayers, that's not to say there aren't dangers as well. Because, if you run across a particularly fierce demon, they could attack you the way the one did the sons of Sceva in the book of Acts. So even in the case of deliverance prayer, the laity want to be careful in their interactions with the apparently demonic. Also, they need to be real prudent. One of the reasons that the church wants specially trained priests to do exorcisms is that it's not all about safety. It's also about judging accurately whether the devil is really involved, because there are a lot of situations where someone may be doing something, they may be behaving in a way that other people think they're demonic, when really it could be mental illness or drug use or something else. And so just because someone's behaving bizarrely, you don't want to assume it's a demon. If you'd like more information on that topic and discerning whether something is really a demon, I would suggest checking out an episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. It's episode 188, and it's all about demons and whether or not they are or are not involved, as well as some of the tragedies that can happen when people falsely diagnose a demon, when they think something is demonic and it's not. Once again, that's episode 188 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and you can access it by going to mysterious.fm/188.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the question, Christopher, and I hope you will check that out. We got to keep moving. Up next is Steve in Napomo, California, watching on YouTube. Welcome back, Steve. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you, Cy. Good talking with you. You know me as a guy wanting to move towards the church, mostly Lutheran background. My mother is a full-blown Lutheran. We just got the news that, the cancer spread. She's got 6 months to a year and a half to live. I'm not going to expect her to change now, but would you please, can you help me theologically, and also some resources that she would accept maybe?
To help her in her time of dying?
She's not really dealt well with the end of life yet, so.
Okay, well, I'll be of what assistance I can. I don't have myself books that are written for preparation for death. I know other Catholics have written such books, and you might do a search on preparation for death. I would suggest reading them yourself before giving them to her, because they may rely on heavily Catholic concepts and stuff that might not be of benefit to her. What I do have, it's not a preparation for death book, but I do have a very short little book called The Words of Eternal Life, and it's a defense of the Christian faith broadly and the Catholic faith in particular. But it's written in a very simple and easy to read way. Cy, I'm sure if Steve hangs on the line, we can arrange to send him a copy of the Words of Eternal Life.
Yes.
And you might read that and see if you think that would be of help to your mother.
Hang on the line, Steve, and we'll get that to you. Can Edgar, what will you tell Edgar when he's got a minute? Yeah, send that to Steve, the Words of Eternal Life.
And also, we want to ask the audience to pray for your mother and for everyone in similar situations.
Steve, thanks. Look forward to speaking with you again. It's open forum, and you can call and ask Jimmy Akin anything you want. 888-318-7884. I am very excited that we are going to be coming back right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. We're developing all kinds of Thursday rituals here. We got the Thursday groovy music, and now we've got this thing that you do, Thomas, where you come in here. Thomas, social media maven, comes in and brings questions for Jimmy from TikTok. TikTok, one of the few remaining social media sites not owned by Elon Musk. I think there are one or two. Still
no, they're owned by China.
Oh, yeah, TikTok is owned by China, right?
Yeah, hopefully Elon will own them sometime. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe he'll buy them. But
it would be great if Elon bought China. That would be good.
Yes, it would.
What do you think it's going for these days? I don't even know what the going price for China is.
TikTok? Gosh, I don't even know how to
TikTok.
convert.
All right, so Thomas brings questions from TikTok, and then he takes Jimmy's answers back to TikTok and shares them with TikTok participants, viewers, what do you call them?
Viewers, yeah.
Viewers around
Followers.
the world. In a little segment we like to call TikTok Culture Shock. Take it, Thomas.
Okay, that's like middle of the pack of names you've proposed so far.
All right.
Yeah, Jimmy, I kind of wish I'd remembered to bring this on the show last week because it's great for the lead up to Halloween. But in any case, I think it's a question that you would have fun answering.
Halloween is in our hearts.
That's right, and there's only 360 something days left until the next one. So this person just wants us to, he asked if we can make a video about the Church's view on ghosts.
Okay, so let's start by talking about what ghosts are. English is a Germanic language, and the word ghost is related to the German word Geist, and it means spirit. That's why we sometimes in English refer to the Holy Spirit, and sometimes we refer to the Holy Ghost. Same thing. Ghost just means spirit. Obviously, the Catholic Church teaches spirits exist, as with the Holy Spirit, but also the human spirit. So a ghost, the way the term is normally used, refers to the spirit of a human being who has died. Now, what people want to know about ghosts, once they understand that concept, is do they ever appear to the living? And the Catholic Church says, yeah, they do. This is particularly the case, for example, in what are known as apparitions. An apparition is the appearance. You can hear how apparition, appearance, it's the same root. When a departed human spirit appears to someone, that is an apparition. And there have been various apparitions of the saints down through history. These would be people who are in heaven, who are nevertheless appearing to people here on earth. But in the history of Catholic thought, it actually goes farther than that. Also, there is a long history of people who are in purgatory. So these are holy souls appearing to people on earth, either as part of their purgatorial process, either doing something they needed to do in life and they kind of neglected, or appearing in order to ask for prayers. St. Thomas Aquinas was of the opinion that not only can the saints and the holy souls appear to us, but even lost souls can appear to us. Perhaps, for example, in a kind of Jacob Marley role, you better shape up or you're going to end up where I am, or something like that. Incidentally, Jesus' own apostles believed in apparitions. They believed that spirits could appear to us. We read in the Gospels that when Jesus was walking across the water in the middle of the night, they at first thought it was a ghost, until they talked to him and found out it was Jesus. Then, after the resurrection, they thought maybe this isn't physical, maybe because they weren't expecting a resurrection. Maybe this is a ghost. And Jesus ate food in front of them and said, handle my body. A spirit has not flesh and bones as you see that I have. And so he had to prove to him that he wasn't just a ghost. Notice he didn't say, come on, guys, ghosts don't exist. He accepted their belief in the possibility of ghosts appearing to people, and so does the Catholic Church.
That's fascinating, and it seems like most of those are of more of a benevolent type, right? They're not so much a malicious kind of spirit haunting a certain place and just trying to give people the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. Now, that's not to say some ghosts aren't jerks. There are people who are jerks in this life, and there have been reports of ghosts that have annoyed people, or for various reasons, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. I mean, angels aren't all sweetness and light. I mean, they're morally good, but angels could annoy people too, and they do things in Scripture at times that are uncomfortable for people.
First thing they usually say is, "Don't be scared."
Well, exactly, and so ghosts can also be scary, but at least normally, if it's a saint or if it's a holy soul, it's on the side of good, and even if it's a little scary, it may not. It's not out to hurt you.
All right, I'll sleep a little better tonight. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you, Thomas, for that fine segment of a little bit we like to call TikTok Culture Shock. Come back, and I'll have another title next time. Megan in Wisconsin's next.
Who are you going to call? Jimmy Aiken.
Or the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. You know what
he doesn't give as good answers.
That's true, too. Yes, that's true.
The one time I saw him get called, it did not go well.
No, that's true. Megan in Wisconsin watching on YouTube, you're up next. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy Aiken.
Hello, Cy and Jimmy. My question is kind of how do we refute the Calvinist view of free will?
Okay, so the idea of free will in Calvinism, I mean, it can take a few different forms, but there are different ways of approaching that subject, because the Catholic Church has a range of opinions on how free will works. And depending on which permitted view you adopt, you would object to the Calvinist view to different degrees. Kind of the minimum or the smallest area of disagreement would be the idea that free will works in such a way that God determines who is damned by passing over them and not giving them the grace needed for them to make a choice for him. And so God becomes the reason that damned people are damned. And that can be objected to on scriptural grounds in a number of different ways. But one of the things that we read, now they will have verses they will attempt to appeal to support this view, but there are other verses that indicate that and state flat out, God does not desire anyone to be lost, but for everyone to come to a knowledge of the truth and to be saved. And furthermore, we find multiple verses in Scripture that will emphasize human freedom and talk about, you need to make a choice. And it's not like God's going to make the choice for you and manipulate you like a puppet. It's no, you need to make the choice. Now, there are rebuttals that they will try. The truth is that there are passages that can be read both ways in Scripture. There are passages that emphasize divine sovereignty, and there are passages that emphasize human liberty. And the question is, how do we square these? But if you want to say that God determines who goes to hell, then that is very hard to distinguish from the proposition that God is the author of evil. They will try to do so, but the responses they will make are, to most people, certainly to anyone who's not a Calvinist, are not convincing. And so even in the Protestant community, you'll have a lot of disagreement saying, look, your view of God is monstrous. It involves God effectively choosing to send people to hell and then guaranteeing that they commit the sins that will result in them going there. And so it's very hard to square that with the idea of God being all good. And you've got to face these other passages that emphasize you have a choice here and that God doesn't want anybody to be lost. So through that collection of different notes or different points, those would be some of the things that I would point to in objection to Calvinism. There are other aspects of Calvinism that one could also object to, depending on your view, but that's sort of a narrow application that virtually everyone who is Catholic would be willing to agree to, that aspect of Calvinism is definitely wrong.
Okay, Megan?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for the call and for the question. All the other lines full, so we'll take a very quick break and get right back to the phones with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I'm a Dominican, and St. Dominic was an itinerant preacher who ran around and touched people's lives by open-air preaching. The radio opens the possibilities of doing this to the entire world in a very intimate sense.
EWTN Open Line Thursday with Father Brian Mulady. Tonight, 10 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kelly, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Another script to read with exclamation points in it. Have you seen the 2023 official Catholic Answers calendar? It's out now, and it's another masterpiece. This year's edition is Women of the Bible, and it features classic 16th and 17th century artwork of scenes with some of the most famous women in Scripture, from the Blessed Mother and Mary Magdalene to Esther and even Eve. Go to Catholic.com and click the banner at the top of the page to find out how to get yours today. Up next, TJ.
You should check out a video by Victor Borgia.
Okay.
Because he had he developed a system for pronouncing punctuation marks.
He's so funny. He's so funny.
So you might want to check out Victor Borgia's punctuation routine, and you might get some pointer. You might want to read some scripts using his system of phonetic punctuation at some point.
Okay, I will check it out. That's when there used to be variety shows, and he was always on those variety shows. I always loved when he was on. He's just so weirdly funny. All right, where was I going? Oh, yeah, I was going to the phones. TJ in Texas watching on YouTube. We're glad you're here, TJ. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Good evening, gentlemen. Forgive me if I'm a little shaky asking this question. It got kind of serious this week. My question is on the most recent update to the Catechism and the teaching on capital punishment. How far on either side of that can one can a potential juror, if you have to weigh in on a case that involves that, how far can you go along with, say, your state or your local authorities' definition on what that details without contradicting the faith or anything like? I hope that makes sense.
Well, so you're going to be a juror in a capital case?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So that is a grave responsibility. So you're wondering, as a Catholic, do you have to take the Catholic view as opposed to capital punishment while you're a juror?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, they asked me a couple of questions in some of the interviews, and I tried to articulate it as close as I could to what the church teaches, as far as respecting everyone's right to life, and we do need to find a better solution if we can before we get to that step. But if the law is laid out that, hey, if they meet this criteria, if they do meet that criteria, and I'm sorry, I'm really shaky.
That's okay. I think I have enough to begin an answer, and then TJ, you can tell me whether you need more. So if you get on this jury, then you'll want to do some studying on this question. Now, in looking at the most recent edition of the Catechism, when it comes to capital punishment, the first step is discerning what kind of statement this is. Is it a doctrinal statement, or is it a prudential statement? You'll note that what the Catechism says is that the use of the death penalty today is inadmissible. And inadmissible is a new term that has not been used previously in the history of this question. And it seems like they're deliberately avoiding using traditional terminology in this area because they don't seem to have a clear way of articulating the intuition that recent popes have had, which is they don't want to see capital punishment happening. They don't have a clear way of relating that to what has been the history of teaching in this area, because the history of teaching is that it is in principle morally legitimate to use capital punishment, and the opposite of that in historic doctrinal terms would be to say that it is intrinsically immoral to use capital punishment, meaning it's never licit, morally licit, to use capital punishment. And they seem to be deliberately avoiding that and saying that it's intrinsically immoral, and I think for good reason, because you have scripture that endorses the use of capital punishment, and you have Catholic cultures and popes and councils that have endorsed capital punishment all the way down through history. So given all of that weight, I think it would be very hard to make an argument that capital punishment is intrinsically wrong or intrinsically immoral. And therefore, it seems to me they're trying to carve out new language to capture this intuition that they don't want to see it happening in the modern world. And if that's the case, then they're not actually making a doctrinal judgment. They're making a prudential judgment based on the factors that pertain in today's world and the way they perceive things on this subject. In that case, one is always to receive what the magisterium says, including just prudential judgments, with gratitude and give it serious consideration. But if it's not a doctrine, it's not doctrinally binding. And so it would be up to you to discern, what do you think about this? How much do you agree that capital punishment should not be used today? And are there situations where it would be legitimate to use? And then in the particular court case you're looking at, is this one of those? On the other hand, let's suppose that the case I've just laid out is mistaken, and that this is a teaching. Well, it's still a very tentative teaching. The language that's used and is non-traditional language, and it's only just recently been proposed. The language has not been clarified, and so this, if it were a doctrine, and I find it very difficult to classify this as a doctrine rather than a prudential judgment. But if it were a doctrine, it would be very tentative and light in its authority level compared to other doctrines that are much more authoritative and even infallible. This would definitely be on the lowest end of doctrinal authority. So that would be something you would want to take into account. But since it's a non-infallible teaching, it's possible that it could be mistaken. And again, you would have a choice to make about, do you agree with this idea that as a doctrine that capital punishment can never be used. If you disagree with that, which is possible, the church acknowledges it's possible to disagree with non-infallible teachings. It's not something to be done lightly. But it is possible in good conscience to say, I just don't disagree with this non-infallible teaching. And if you did disagree with this non-infallible teaching, then it would be up to you to discern when capital punishment would be legitimate and whether or not it would be legitimate in the particular case that you are participating in. On the other hand, so those would be avenues by which someone who did favor capital punishment would be able to relate to this new revision in the Catechism. But let's go the other way, because I'm trying to be complete here. Suppose that you, whether on doctrinal grounds or prudential grounds, you decide that capital punishment should not be used in today's world. What would you do then as a juror, as in navigating a case that involves potentially capital punishment? Well, it seems to me that you could intervene at a couple of points. One of them is during the sentencing phase of the trial. You could recommend against capital punishment. If you're convinced that it should not be used in today's world, you can vote not to for life imprisonment or some other sentence, but not capital punishment. And you could use your vote on the jury to recommend against capital punishment. On the other hand, if there's a mandatory sentencing situation where if you do vote in the initial trial phase, if you do vote to convict in the guilt phase, then the penalty of capital punishment will be automatic. Then in the trial, in the guilt phase of the trial, you would be able to use your vote again in a way known in conducting what is known as jury nullification. Jury nullification is a situation in which a jury knows what the law says, and they know the evidence has been presented to, let's say, convict, but they fundamentally disagree with what will happen if a person is convicted. And so even though they may believe that that someone is guilty, they may refute under the law. They may say this is an immoral situation. If we convict this person, it will be immoral, and therefore we're going to use our votes to acquit this person or convict them of some lesser charge or something like that, because what the prosecutor is asking of us is immoral. And so if this were a mandatory sentencing situation where if you vote to convict, the person will be put to death, you could use your vote in an effort for jury nullification. So there are a number of different options here. Unfortunately, this is a brief radio answer, so I can't explore everything, but I hope that gives you some principles that you could use to go forward and do some further study, because it is a very important situation that one is facing if you're literally voting on a matter that pertains to someone's life and death.
TJ, we said we'd come back to you. What do you think?
It's fantastic. It's similar to what I was thinking, and I'm doing my best to take it as seriously as possible and not rely on emotions or anything like that to even make any decisions. It's still pending selection, but I'm really trying to, be as true to my faith and to my gut as possible, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And, obviously we can't discuss details of the case with you, but if we can be of further assistance, please do let us know on or off the air.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you need us off the air, just send an email to radio@catholic.com, where we check those, radio@catholic.com, and we'll get you in touch with whoever you need to get in touch with. TJ, thank you. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the question and the thoughtfulness behind the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour and next. It's open forum. I don't know if we can get another question in, Jimmy. I might just
Well, then why don't you ask something?
All right, Jimmy. What happened in that New Mexico Socorro event that seemed to be a UFO sighting?
Okay, well, I was going to say spoilers, but
don't say spoilers.
But in terms of a basic account, so you have Officer Zamora was pursuing a speeding young person on the highway. He heard an extremely loud roaring noise, and he remembered there is a dynamite shack nearby, and he was afraid that the dynamite shack might have exploded, and that's what was producing the extraordinarily loud roaring noise that he heard. So he abandoned pursuit of the speeding young person and drove towards where the dynamite shack was, and upon coming up on a rise, he beheld an oval-shaped, unidentified object with a flame coming out underneath it. It then landed, and it took him a while to get up to the top of the rise, but on looking down, he saw the object with a couple of beings around it. Oh. He then saw the object take off again. It retreated extremely fast, and it left burning residue on the ground, which was witnessed and photographed by fellow police officers.
That's tomorrow's episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Drops every Friday morning. Check it out by going to mysterious.fm or just typing in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World into your searching machine. We're going to take a very quick break, and then we're going to be back. Lots of folks on the line, so we'll get right to questions when we get back. If you'd like to try to get in on an open line, 888-318-7884. It's open forum, open to anyone, and open to just about anything as far as questions go. Right back after this. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. As promised, another hour of open forum with Jimmy Akin here as our guest. Your call's welcome, 888-31-TRUTH. And about, carry the 1 million people on the line right now. So right back to the phones we go. Jimmy, thanks for coming back for another hour.
My pleasure.
Looking forward to the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. I wonder what this is. Could it be a military craft of some sort? Is that a possibility? Or no?
That's one of the things that they asked in the wake of the experience.
All right. Now I see what you're saying. I got to tune in to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on my own.
Well, think about it this way. If they had found that it was a military craft...
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good
would
point.
this still be a mystery?
No, it would not. All right, going to the phones. John in Pennsylvania, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. I can only imagine, John, how many campaign ads are on TV in Pennsylvania right now. It must be insane.
Definitely, but that's why I don't watch TV.
Smart move, man. What do you do?
I am I'm a history teacher.
Oh, all right. Well, we're glad to have you here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Okay, well, I've got two questions. One's for you, Cy, and one's for Jimmy. So my one for you is a quick one. Just how do I get a question in for the weird questions with Jimmy days or whatever? Is there an email for that or something?
Well,
and
okay.
You want to? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's not a question for me. That's a question for Jimmy because he'll tell you how to do it.
You can either email me directly at one of my numerous email addresses, or you could email radio@catholic.com and they will forward it to me. And just make sure it's flagged in the subject line as weird question so I know the rubric to look at it under.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so then my real question is, I do martial arts, and to try and keep myself fit and for practice of the martial arts, I do a practice called Qigong, which is I stand in certain positions. The Chinese practice, there's different types of Qigong, but the one I do, I just stand in different positions, and I don't think anything. I just stand in those positions for a certain amount of time. And then also I do yoga. At home, I do the stretching, a series of stretches to help keep my body limber. And for me, I've always thought that there's no problem with this, because I'm not doing it for spiritual reasons or anything, and I think you can get, you can help from something even if you don't agree with, chiropractic. The guy who started chiropractic was a believer in spiritualism, and he thought his thing was, related to mesmerism and all this stuff. But actually, you can still get relief from it, or you can use it practically. So, but my thing is that I've had a lot of people asking me, predominantly Protestants saying, well, as a Christian, you shouldn't be doing those things. You shouldn't do yoga or these kind of exercises because they're not Christian. So I'd like to hear your opinion. If you could walk me through the logic of where's the cutoff of what's licit and not licit for a Catholic.
In these practices, in your participation in these practices, are you doing them alone or are you doing them in a group setting?
By myself.
Okay, so that leaves out any question of that means we don't have to deal with any question of what is the impact on other people by you doing them, since you're doing them by yourself. Second question: are you appealing to any spirits, whether they're gods or angels or demons or departed human spirits or nature spirits? Are you appealing to any spirits in your practice of these things?
No.
Okay. Are you attempting to manipulate energies in your body, meaning energies of some kind of spiritual nature?
No.
Okay. So for you, these are just physical motions that you're using to relax or balance or something like that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you are not doing anything religious here, and therefore you are not doing anything that is contrary to the Christian religion. For historical reasons, you may refer to these practices as Qigong or yoga, but fundamentally, you're not doing anything. You're not getting any religious benefit out of this, are you?
No.
Okay, so you're not doing anything religious here. You're just doing some exercises. And as a result, you are not doing anything contrary to the Catholic understanding of the Christian faith. And consequently, if someone asks you about these, you can just tell them, look, this isn't religious at all to me. I'm just doing exercises. And so I'm not doing any kind of faith practice here at all.
Perfect.
All right. Very good.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Back to the
That
history
way you don't
teaching.
have to- Yep.
All right. Look forward to your weird question.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye, John. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Let me see where we're going next. Oh, what did I do? I'm looking at the wrong sheet. I apologize. Jimmy, who's next? Can you tell me who's next? I have a little problem here with my internet.
Let's see. Dana on line 2.
All right, Dana on line 2. Thanks for waiting, Dana. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy. Dana?
Thank you. Hey,
Go
I
ahead.
hope that you can hear me.
Yep.
Yes, so I am a skeptic. I don't believe Jesus is divine. Just full disclosure on that, which really affects the way I look at the gospel stories. But my question is, John chapter 2, verse 10, it appears that the people at the wedding in Canaan, when Jesus' miracle of turning water into wine, by the comments of the banquet master, that they had some level of alcohol impairment, at least to the point where they couldn't necessarily tell the difference between a really good quality wine or a cheaper wine, depending on how you want to, what lens you want to look through this story through. But I was wondering, what Jimmy's comments were about, was Jesus being irresponsible when he turned water into wine, or is this really a miracle as it's portrayed to be, in him showing his divinity in this way?
Well, it is a miracle, and he is showing his supernatural power from God. In terms of the responsibility of that, I guess there are a few things to say. The first one is the sin of drunkenness is not any alcohol consumption, and it's not just any level of alcohol impairment either. If you look at, for example, at St. Thomas Aquinas' treatment of this, he explains that the sin of drunkenness or intoxication is when you consume so much that you lose your moral faculties and thus become open to committing immoral acts. In other words, so that's the fundamental essence of the sin of drunkenness. If you have consumed alcohol, and even if you're experiencing some effects of alcohol, but you haven't lost your moral faculties, then you're not committing the sin of drunkenness. You are, in Aquinas' words, imperfectly drunk rather than perfectly drunk. And so all we know from the text is that at least most of the people, or many of the people at the wedding at Cana, had drunk enough that they had some taste discernment impairment, but that doesn't mean they had lost their moral faculties and were willing to go do flagrantly immoral things. So by continuing to facilitate the party, Jesus wouldn't be doing anything that was immoral. He wasn't behaving irresponsibly in that way. Furthermore, I think this illustrates something else, because there's a very good chance that some of the people at the wedding had drunk too much, more than they should have, and it is. I guess there. Back up one step from that. Our culture has a kind of puritanical nature that is suspicious at times of pleasures, and we don't want to let modern puritanical judgments about situations like this govern our reading of scripture passages. We need to recognize that our culture was so crazy that in the early 20th century, they tried to ban drinking alcohol outright for everybody in the United States. That's how crazy our culture is. And that experience was known as Prohibition. It happened in the 1920s, and it was so disastrous, they ended it by the 1930s. And so, but nevertheless, we come from a culture where that was possible, where you could pass a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol consumption for everyone. And so we have a culture that has a big problem with appreciating the role of the proper use of alcohol. And there are still lingering effects of that today. But it is quite possible and even likely that some of the people at this wedding got plastered and they were drinking more than they should have. And by making more wine for the people at this party to use, some of them would probably go on to either stay drunk or get drunker yet. And yet Jesus did it anyway. And one of the things that shows us is we can't take responsibility for other people's choices. Now, there are situations where you know what someone's going to do, and that modifies your behavior. You take steps to ensure that they don't do what you foresee. But in principle, you've got a whole bunch of people. They are not all drinking to excess. They are not all plastered out of their minds and willing to, go commit immoral acts. And even if some of them are, you don't let that ruin it for everybody. And so you allow people to have the freedom to make the choices that they're going to make. And the responsibility for those choices is fundamentally on them, not on you. And so there's an important lesson here, because the kind of puritanical streak in American culture can often lead us as people of conscience to want to take responsibility for others' actions, so that we feel that we are doing something wrong if someone else is doing something wrong. And very often that is not the case. There are exceptions, but fundamentally Jesus did this, and that shows us it was okay for him to do this. And it would be similarly okay for any one of us if we had been at that party. Now, I don't have miraculous powers. I can't turn water into wine. But if I was at that wedding party and someone said, "Hey, we're out of wine. Can you go down to the store and pick up some more?" It would be legitimate for me to go down to the store and pick up some more.
Does that work for you, Dana?
Well, I was wondering if I could maybe just push back a little bit on that, and that Jesus is this divine character, and a few people being intoxicated at that wedding could, in fact, ruin it for the entire wedding. Not to mention that,
well,
in
if
modern
they
society,
were,
we know a lot more about alcohol abuse than they did in ancient times. It would actually, in many states, it's illegal to serve people once they show signs of alcohol impairment. And then there's alcohol addiction. It all kind of starts with alcohol impairment. And this is best case scenario. If you look at the Greek translation, the people are actually drunk. That's what the party master says when you look at the original language. Now, people have, translated Bibles differently. But anyway, we have a different view on this. And I think it's because of your lens of Christianity and my lens of skepticism that we might see different things in these stories.
Yeah, so you laid about 6 or 7 issues on the table right there, and I probably won't be able to remember them all. But I would say you're coming from a cultural perspective. I would say, number one, we really don't know a huge amount more about alcohol misuse today than we did then. People have been using alcohol for tens of thousands of years, and we have a long human experience with it. In fact, that's one of the reasons that people of European ancestry can tolerate liquor better than people with Native American ancestry, because Europeans have been drinking wine forever, and there has been a microevolution process that has allowed them to process it better. But if you're determined to see what Jesus did as immoral in this situation, I can't dissuade you from that. But I would suggest that it's coming from a puritanical perspective, that even though you're a skeptic, you have nevertheless imbibed from our culture. And you look at the logic that you're using, you're saying, well, alcohol abuse starts with alcohol impairment. Well, sure, but that doesn't mean that that just because someone has become impaired, they're going to proceed to chronic abuse. That's what's known as the slippery slope fallacy, that just because someone has achieved a stage that can lead to something really bad doesn't mean that's going to happen. For some people, will it? Sure. But you can shut down any activity you want if you say some people are going to abuse this, therefore the mere fact that some people are going to abuse it is reason to shut it down. That will shut down anything, and that will result in a kind of totalitarian situation where you or, the people of your mindset are making decisions for everybody, like happened in Prohibition. It won't just be limited to alcohol. I mean, frankly, a much bigger problem in our society today than alcohol is obesity. And you already have people who are trying to regulate the size of sodas, and you can end up in a totalitarian situation where you have government prescribed menus that you're not allowed to deviate from and that are not suited to you as an individual. There has to be a role for human freedom here, and even though we recognize that freedom can be abused, that doesn't mean we embrace totalitarianism as a way of avoiding the abuse of freedom. We want to, educate and inform and experiment and figure out how freedom is best used, but we don't want to eliminate freedom just because some people will abuse it.
Dana, I'll leave it there. We're kind of late for the break, but I was enjoying the conversation. So we'll take the break and we'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
The power of prayer simply means that words have an effect. For example, when a couple says, "I do," it literally changes two people to becoming one in marriage. When you say, "I love you," it changes us and it gives us value. The power of prayer is in the words and in the sentiment, but it's also in the fact that God, who is omnipotent, all-powerful, answers our prayers.
Welcome back. It's Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin's our guest. Don't forget, we got everything on sale right now at shop.catholic.com. And maybe you want to consider doing some of your Christmas shopping, because we know there's around Christmas, sometimes these shipping issues develop, and you won't have any of those issues. If you want to stop on over, do some Christmas shopping, shop.catholic.com. Everything's on sale. Some things 10, some things 25, some things more than 25% off. Shop.catholic.com. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Christian in Keyport, New Jersey, watching on YouTube. You are next, Christian. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Cy. Hi, Jimmy. It's been a while since I spoke, but thank you so much for having me. So just get straight to the question. Why does the Western Rite in its liturgical discipline still choose to not confirm and give the Eucharist to infants like the Eastern Catholics and Orthodox? I know there is a historical reason for it that I, off the top of my head, can't recall. I know it was in the Middle Ages. The only reason that I could find is that the Eucharist to children requires that they have sufficient knowledge to really appreciate what they're getting. But Eastern Orthodox friends don't seem to really understand or see it as a legitimate reason for the West that in the modern world today to keep babies and toddlers from being confirmed and receiving the Eucharist. The second part is a little hypothetical.
Okay, let's stop. Let's deal with that first part, because otherwise, I mean, if people lay out a whole bunch of considerations, I may not remember them all when I'm giving the answer. So let's deal with that first, then you can ask part two. So the reason that that the Latin Rite of the Catholic Church does not confirm infants until until a later point in life than baptism is because these two sacraments are were originally celebrated in the early church, at least in the typical situation. They were celebrated by the bishop, and he would give essentially both sacraments to a child at the same time. He would baptize the child, and then he would confirm the child. But then the church grew dramatically, and there were so many babies that needed baptizing that you had to make a choice. Either we had to let people other than the bishop do baptism, because there was no way the bishop could baptize every baby in his diocese. And so the principal ordinary celebrant of baptism became the priest. But then you've got a choice of, since we've historically had the sacrament of confirmation celebrated by the bishop, do you want to have priests doing that on an ordinary basis now or not? And the different rites made different choices. In the Latin rite, the choice was made to say, okay, we're going to have priests be the ordinary people who do baptism, but we still want to have confirmation associated with the bishop. So the bishop will be the ordinary minister of confirmation. And in other rites, in Eastern Catholic circles, they made the opposite choice. They said, okay, so we need priests to be the ordinary ministers of baptism. Therefore, priests can also be the ordinary ministers of confirmation. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those positions. There's not a deep theological reason that says you need to make one choice than the other. They're both legitimate choices to make. You can have preferences. Personally, I tend to prefer the Eastern practice, but that's just a preference. It's not something that needs to be that way because of divine revelation, because divine revelation doesn't dictate one solution over the other. When it comes to admission to the Eucharist, yeah, I mean, you already identified the reason for that. The Latin rite chose to wait until the child can appreciate the nature of the Eucharist that they are receiving, that this is really Christ's body. And various Eastern rites, not all of them, but various Eastern rites made the opposite choice. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with either one. You can have an opinion of which one you like, but neither is definitively correct, and they're both legitimate options, which is why the Church allows them both in different situations, in different rites. So that kind of addresses your part one of your question. What's part two?
I think part two is already answered, but I'll just say it anyway. In the case of an emergency, if the baby's in danger of dying and a Roman Catholic priest isn't available for the parents, would it be acceptable for the parents to go to an Eastern Catholic priest to perform the sacrament of confirmation, viaticum, and baptism? Or would that be kind of pushing certain boundaries? Because I know respectfully we should be respecting various rites and traditions as Catholics.
Okay, so under the way canon law is presently configured, Eastern Rite Catholic priests are able to administer the sacraments of initiation, so that's baptism, confirmation, and the Eucharist, to their own subjects. And the way subject is construed in Eastern canon law, it doesn't necessarily mean someone who belongs to your rite and lives in your parish territory. It can be a more informal affiliation. You need to have some kind of connection to where, you're this priest subject. And then, like, let's say you go to his church regularly, regardless of where you live or what rite you belong to. And then he could administer the sacraments to your child. When it comes to an emergency situation and the child has already been baptized, my memory is that currently presses against some legal boundaries, but that could and I think should be modified in the future. In fact, I think my personal opinion is that Latin Rite canon law should be modified in the future so that dying infants can be confirmed and receive viaticum. But that's what I would have to say. Now, in terms of viaticum, so that is one where you probably could take, this is my memory, it's been a while since I've looked at the law on this, but my memory would be that you probably could go to an Eastern Rite priest and get viaticum for your child even if the child had not previously been initiated into the Eucharist in the Latin Rite and is not of such an age that they can understand the Eucharist. In fact, today, if you're in an Eastern church, like the ones where they give communion via a spoon, and you're carrying a baby, you better turn the baby away unless you want your child to receive the Eucharist and be initiated on the spot, because they're not hesitant about giving it to baptized children. The trickier one would be confirmation, and that's one where I hope that the law gets to a point where confirmation will be administered, at least in danger of death, to children regardless of their age.
Christian, thanks. You can hear the music, so that means we have to take the break, but it'll be a very short break. We'll be right back with more calls for Jimmy. It's open forum. Anybody can call with any question at all for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with why we're pro-life, but only if you step up and help us. Thank you so much. For more information, visit whyweareprolife.com.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. A little bit of groovy music for you. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. And I don't want to jinx Sarah, but I think the audio has been perfect so far today. So I think you got a half hour to go, but so, keep it together. But perfection so far. Max in Utah is next, watching on YouTube. Max, thanks for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, thank you for taking my call. I will start by saying I'm holding my infant son, so hopefully he won't make any noise. But
we're pro baby. Okay. Babies are going to baby.
Yeah, yes, they are. Yes, they are. So my question is, so I grew up Mormon, living in Utah, not that uncommon, but I got married Mormon. I did that whole Mormon thing, and then in my process of leaving the Mormon church, which I have since done, I was divorced. And as I have been finding my way to the Catholic Church, I know that is a kind of a big no-no. And so I wanted to know kind of what I needed to do to kind of get that taken care of. Like, I'm really not even sure, like, how to ask a question. I just want to make sure that, like, if and when I find my way into communion with the church, like, I want to make sure that I'm okay, if that makes sense.
Sure, and that's very commendable. So the church acknowledges that there are legitimate reasons for a couple to have a civil divorce, and so don't think that this is automatically going to be regarded as a big problem. But so are you currently remarried, or are you planning on getting remarried?
I'm planning to be remarried.
Okay.
I actually, my girlfriend and I are planning on it. That's who the mother is to this little boy I'm holding.
Okay. So the church will want to make sure. Now, there are a couple of ways to proceed on this. So the first one, you were a Mormon. You had never been any other kind of, you'd never been baptized in any other group. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And was the same thing true for your former spouse?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the church had done an analysis of this and concluded that, regrettably, despite the best intentions of Mormons, that Mormon baptisms are not valid, and so as a result, the marriage that you had with your former spouse was purely natural. It may have been a valid marriage, or it may have been an invalid marriage, but it would not have been a sacramental marriage. It would have been natural. Because it was a natural marriage, it is possible for it to be dissolved. What cannot be dissolved is a sacramental marriage between validly baptized Christians. So there is a provision. It's based on a passage in 1 Corinthians, which was, of course, written by St. Paul, where he indicates that, like, a believer is not bound to an unbelieving partner if the unbelieving partner is not willing to live with the believing partner as a Christian. And so that's given rise to a procedure known in canon law as the Pauline privilege, because 1 Corinthians was written by St. Paul. And because your marriage was one where it was purely natural and thus can be dissolved by something other than death, if you were to be baptized as a Catholic and your former spouse has no interest in being married, that marriage could be dissolved. And so the Pauline privilege is one option that is open in your situation. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is that even though even though you attempted marriage with your former spouse, that it may not have actually come into existence. There are various things that can go wrong that could prevent two parties who are attempting marriage from actually contracting a marriage, and so the marriage as a result could be null. And if that's the case, then the church has a procedure for investigating that as well. It's what's known as the annulment process. So the church would need to look into your former marriage with your first spouse and ask questions and then discern, was there anything at the time this marriage was contracted that would have kept it from coming into existence? And if the answer to that is yes, then the marriage was null, and that means you're free to marry your current fiancé. So there are basically, in your case, there are basically two options to be possibly pursued. One of them is the Pauline privilege, and the other is the annulment process. And oftentimes they'll do the annulment process first, but the Pauline privilege is also a possibility. So I would suggest when you discern that you think you want to become Catholic, and when you're fairly certain about that, contact your local parish and explain the situation and say that you're interested in pursuing the annulment process and or the Pauline privilege.
Okay, Max.
Okay, yeah, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you.
All right. God bless you, brother. Thank you. If we can be of assistance, call again. We look forward to talking with you. Now, here's an old friend, Annie in Long Island, New York, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Hi again, Annie.
Hi, I love you guys. Oh, I'm so grateful. I'm Catholic now, 4 months.
Oh, I know. Congratulations.
90 years, and I just became Catholic 4 months ago.
Well, praise God, Annie.
Okay, I have kind of like two questions. You mentioned, did I misunderstand you when you said something about not to watch TV? Because I watch two Catholic stations.
No, we were joking around with another caller. So no, we weren't saying don't watch television, and especially we weren't saying don't watch Catholic television. It was just a joke.
Oh, all right, good. Because I enjoy Journey Home. That was a big thing to see.
Cool.
For becoming Catholic.
Marcus
And
Grodi.
of course, yep, wonderful. And of course, Catholic Answers. Okay, and the other one is yoga. Now, the fellow you were talking to said he does it alone, and he doesn't do anything religious. But I'm praying that my daughter comes out of yoga because she teaches yoga. She kind of left the faith. I don't think down deep she didn't, but she in yoga they have movements where you're folding your hands like you're praying, and I don't think that's wise, to do. But I don't know exactly what you told the fellow there.
Well, yeah. So I asked him, was he invoking any spirits in his practice of these exercises, and he said no. And I asked him, was he trying to move spiritual energy around, and he said no. And I asked him, are you doing anything religious here? Are you trying to get some spiritual benefit by doing this? And he said no. So he wasn't doing anything religious, because you got to invoke the spiritual, whether it's spirits or energy or spiritual benefits or something, in order to be doing something religious, and he wasn't doing any of those things. Now, you will hear some people try to claim, I think this may be what's at the origin of your question, although you could tell me if I'm wrong. I have heard some people say, oh, well, when you make these yoga postures, it's like a posture that's dedicated to some Hindu deity, let's say Vishnu. And so you're making the Vishnu posture, and you shouldn't be doing that as a Christian. Well, postures mean what people interpret them to mean. Postures are symbolic. Psychelet, if I raise my hand at an angle and place it above my eyebrow, what is that posture I'm doing?
Well, I believe you are, because you're in my presence, saluting a superior officer.
Well, at least I'm saluting.
Oh, okay.
That's
maybe too much interpretation on that.
That's because you're not my superior officer. But you could read that as I'm saluting, or you could read that as I'm scratching my forehead.
Oh yeah, right.
And so postures have the meaning that we give them, and the answer doesn't have to be the same for everybody, because just like languages are different. The word I'm going to blank on one, but you can have a single sound that means something in one language, and it may mean something completely different in another language. Oh, I've got one. Okay, so for example, the word tick. Okay, so what does tick mean in English?
It's like that little thing that bites you and that sticks in your skin.
Yeah. So a tick in English, that's one of the meanings. It's an insect. But in other languages, tick is the word for finger.
Oh.
And so, in fact, there's an argument in linguistics, at least among some linguists, that tick may be the word for finger in Proto-Human, the original human language, based on its appearance with that meaning in other languages. So words are sound symbols that can mean completely different things, and it depends on how you're using it. If I am wiggling my fingers and going tick 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 tick, well, okay, I'm using it to mean fingers. But if I said I just got bit by a tick, I don't mean I was bit by a finger. I mean I was bit by the insect known as a tick. And in the same way, body postures have symbolic value. If I'm saluting, or if I'm flipping someone the bird, which I never do, or if I put my hands together momentarily when I'm clapping, or in prayer, or something else, there's all kinds of different meanings that they can have, and which one it has at the moment is the one I, the symbol user, am giving to it. So even if I do something that is physically identical to the Vishnu posture, let's say there is such a thing as a Vishnu posture, that doesn't mean it's a Vishnu posture to me. If I'm not using it to honor Vishnu, it's not that. If I'm just doing an exercise with it and I happen to stretch into a particular position, it's just an exercise posture because that's all I'm using it as. And so we shouldn't be superstitious and think that just because someone else used a posture to mean something, we can't use it in a different way. Just like we shouldn't be superstitious that just because someone in another language used a sound one way to mean one concept, that it's forever tainted and we can't use the same sound to mean something completely different in English.
Annie, I'm going to leave it there because I got to go to the break. But we always love to hear from you. Hope we'll hear from you again soon. We've got to take this break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Go forth and preach the good news. It's not just a suggestion. If you want to take more seriously the command of Jesus to share the gospel with those around you, consider joining St. Paul Street Evangelization. It's a grassroots organization that brings the Catholic faith to the streets in a non-confrontational way. Visit our website, www.streetevangelization.com, to learn more. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. It's time to do our part.
Are you prepared to vote?
Citizens have a co-responsibility for society. This duty especially obliges those in a democracy who must elect representatives to run the state on their behalf.
Learn more so you're prepared when you vote this November. Visit EWTN.com/vote for everything Catholic voters need to know before picking up a ballot.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. And on the line is Ryan in California, watching on YouTube. Ryan, thanks for being here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hello. So my question is about two Bible verses, one in 1 Corinthians and one in 2 Maccabees.
Mm-hmm.
And these are about purgatory. And
I guessed based on the citation of those two books together.
Yeah. So I haven't converted to Catholicism, but I was looking at those verses, and I don't really see purgatory in them. I was looking at 2 Maccabees, and they're talking about praying for the dead, but I often pray for the dead simply, to wish that in their life they didn't do anything that would have led them to damnation.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book of Corinthians, it talks about, their works being burned up, but not them. So I'm thinking maybe this is the things that they did on earth, like the treasures they built. Those don't really matter. What matters is what's in heaven. But I don't really see purgatory in these, so I was wondering if you could clear up those concerns.
Yeah, sure. So purgatory is a post-biblical theological concept, and it is, it's like the Trinity, which is also a post-biblical theological concept. It's based on principles that are articulated in Scripture, but it involves taking these principles and kind of putting them together to build up a complete picture of what purgatory is like, just like building up a complete understanding of what the Trinity is like. So we don't have a single verse in the New Testament that says there is one God who is three persons in one being. We don't have a single verse in the Old or the New Testament that says purgatory is the state of purification that occurs after death for those who die in God's friendship and that can be assisted by the actions of the living. But that's the essence of what purgatory is, and we see aspects of that understanding reflected in Scripture. We see, for example, in 2 Maccabees that so they're praying for the dead soldiers who they died fighting for God, And the author of Second Maccabees identifies them as individuals who fell asleep in righteousness. So despite the sin that led to their death, they fundamentally were righteous people. They died in they weren't perfect, but they died in God's friendship, and they have some continuing effects of some kind. We're not told what, but it's understood that they have some continuing effects from their sins that can be assisted by the prayers of the living. They also take up, Judah Maccabee and his men also take up a collection so that they can purchase a sacrifice to be given at the temple in Jerusalem, which is the Old Testament equivalent of having Mass said for someone, Mass being the Christian sacrifice. And so we see that the actions of the living can in some way assist the deceased who have some kind of lingering effects from the sins in life they committed in life, even though they died in God's friendship. So it doesn't articulate specifically the idea of purification, but we're really close to purgatory just based on those principles, because purgatory is the state of purification for those who have died in God's friendship from whatever lingering consequences of sin there may be, and it can be helped by the assistance of the living. We're basically there with, it doesn't use the language, but with Second Maccabees, it basically lays that concept out on the table. And it's something that Jews today continue to understand. It's always been understood in the last 2,000 years of Jewish history, 2,000 plus years of Jewish history, that, yeah, you pray for your departed loved ones, and just like they did in Second Maccabees, and that is still done today. It's not praying across time. I'm really impressed, Ryan, that you do pray across time, because I think that's perfectly legitimate. And, pray, Father, please have helped this person back in their life so that they die in your friendship. That's praying across time. I think that's perfectly possible. I think it's very good to do. I do that myself all the time. And I devoted an episode of Mysterious World to time travel prayer. If you want to hear more about that, you can check that out. But in Jewish prayer and in the Maccabean prayer here, they're not praying, Lord, please help them not have done something back in life. They're acknowledging that these soldiers did something back in life, namely they were wearing these superstitious charms that resulted in their death. And so they're praying for the after effects of that sin. So they're not praying, please help them back when they were still alive. They're praying, please help them now with the lingering effects of that sin. In terms of 1 Corinthians 3, so St. Paul is giving an analogy in which he says we're all going to stand before the judgment of Christ, and our works will be tested by fire. So you're right. It is, in a sense, this is a metaphor, but our works, because they're not physical objects, they can't literally be tested by fire. But it is our works that are being tested. But how does that happen? Well, St. Paul, since we're talking about non-physical objects, the works themselves can't literally be tested by fire. Works are abstract things that can't feel. Works do not have consciousness. If I go down to a soup kitchen and help out poor people for 2 hours, that act does not have consciousness. It can't feel fire. But fire is an experiential image. The reason Scripture uses fire as an image of judgment is to convey the experience of being judged. And so even though Paul says the works are what's being tested, there's a good likelihood here that what he means is we are going to be judged with something that at least is analogous to fire, like some kind of spiritual judgment, on the basis of our works. What he then says is our works, some of them are, if they've been poorly constructed, if they're of inferior quality, they're going to be burned up. But whatever remains, we'll receive a reward for. So he says if a man builds with gold, silver, or precious stones, it will remain, and the man will receive a reward in heaven. Well, obviously, there's an experiential component to that. If you get a reward in heaven, that's great. That feels wonderful. You got a heavenly reward. Awesome. On the other hand, he says that if all of our works are worthless and they all burn up, then the man will suffer loss. And suffering loss is, again, it's an experience, and it doesn't feel good. He even says that the man for whom all of his works are burned up will be saved. So we know he died in God's friendship. He's not one of the damned. He will be saved, but as Paul says, as one escaping through flames. Now, the image that Paul has been building here is like has been using here is like you're building a house or a temple with because you're building on the foundation of Christ. The temple metaphor is probably what's in his mind. You're building a metaphorical temple for Christ with your works. And so if you built out of straw and your metaphorical temple catches fire and in the judgment and you escape through the flames, that's like running out of a wooden or straw temple that's crashing down around you. That ain't fun. I'm tempted to say, take it from one who knows, but I've never actually escaped from a burning temple. In any event, it's not a fun experience. And so that shows that our actions in this life can have consequences that in the afterlife will have a negative effect. We can suffer loss. It can feel like you're running out of a flaming temple to escape the judgment of what happened due to your bad actions in life, and you're still going to be saved. So this also can be, and also because fire is a common spiritual image or a common biblical image of purification. Like we read about being tested in the refiner's fire because they would use fire to like refine metals like gold and silver and iron and stuff. Fire is a very common biblical image of purification. So here in 1 Corinthians, we see our actions in this life, our negative actions in this life, having a continuing effect in the afterlife, even for the saved. But this is apparently a temporary negative effect, so it seems to be one that passes because you escape. You get out through the flames. And we're using a common biblical image of purification. So this all, again, I would say, supports aspects of the doctrine of purgatory, even though it doesn't articulate the whole thing in one place. Does that help, Ryan?
Hang on, Ryan. I got to put you back on here. Go ahead. Does that help you, Ryan?
It does. The only thing about Second Maccabees is my understanding was that the only afterlife they believed in at that time period was Abraham's bosom. So how would they have known about the existence of heaven, hell, or purgatory as Christians understand them today?
Well, they wouldn't have necessarily. So I don't have any basis for saying they knew about Abraham's bosom in particular. Abraham's bosom is a concept that's introduced by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. The idea that of the afterlife that is predominant in the Old Testament is Sheol, which was the place of the dead. And then there was also, by the time of the Maccabees, there was also an awareness that in the future there's going to be a resurrection. And in fact, the author of Second Maccabees comments on that. He says that Judah Maccabee was, not expecting these guys to be worm food. He's expecting them to have a future resurrection, and he's praying that they be freed from the consequences of their sins. He may or may not have understood the afterlife exactly the way we do because, he was living at an earlier stage of progressive revelation. He didn't have all the information about the afterlife that we do, but he did have enough information about the afterlife that he realized there could be lingering effects of sin that follow you into the afterlife, and that obviously that wouldn't be pleasant, whatever those effects are, but they can be assisted by the actions of the living in praying for them and offering sacrifice for them.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, everybody else who called. If you're on the line and we haven't gotten to you tomorrow, we'll start with Ask a Priest first hour, so maybe hang on and ask Father Sam that question tomorrow. Jimmy Akin has been our guest. Jimmy, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the 2 hours.
Likewise. My pleasure, Cy Kellett.
And we'll look forward to the new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. We're in the 200s now, right?
Oh, yeah. We're coming up. We're just did 230, I think.
230 episodes available. So if you've never caught Jimmy Ague's Mysterious World, you got a world of fun in front of you. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.